we've been talking about this in terms of cognitive drift, which is really resonating with people, because you talk about
cognitive drift. Nice.
Yeah, we've been written some blogs on it that I can put down the bottom, but I'll let you answer this. I just write on your research coattails.
Okay. No, I like it. You're framing it like, great media response here. We call it cognitive drift, and I'm going to use that word now because I do think that's right. I think what we see in the same way that we see in any hierarchy, we see demographic diversity, which is more obvious, more visible, changing. We see greater visible diversity, and then when we get to the top of organizations, we see it become much more homogenous. And the same thing happens in terms of cognitive diversity. Much harder to see, but we certainly saw it in the data. And you might see it as well when you're talking to people. And that is that when you enter into an organization, there is greater diversity of thinking. Now, it's never a sort of, an even spread. There are fewer people who tend to think from an evidence point of view, fewer people who tend to think from a risk point of view. It's about 5%. But you have more people who think about things from a process point of view and a people point of view, as well as outcomes and options. And what you start to see as you climb up the ranks is a sort of a stripping away, this sort of, what did you call it? This cognitive drift.
Cognitive
people tend
drift,
to
it leads
drift.
to cultural drift. It's dreadful, Juliet.
it's good. But you see people moving in the direction of what is valued by the senior leadership. And the senior leadership, if they're valuing outcomes and options, you see people drifting into that. So where at the bottom, it's much more sort of like 25%, in a sort of distribution. By the time, as I said, you get to the top of the organization, it's 75% who are thinking about outcomes and options. Where you don't see the drift is in relation to evidence and risk, though that 5% tend to maintain that as they go up. It's a sort of a unique way of thinking about it, but it seems to be a bit resilient. I don't know why, but it goes up. So you see drift, that's true. But what you also see is selection bias. So what I mean by that is the people at the top of the organization are choosing people to advance who think like them. We see it in terms of visible diversity, who look like them, who have the same life experiences as them. But we also see it in the way that people think about things. And and this is where the work started for me, interestingly. When I had joined Deloitte as a partner in 2011, I had this very formative experience where I was in a meeting and we were being asked to make a decision about something, and the leader in that group was like, had the whiteboard going up and, here's all of the options that we could do, and now let's get to the outcome. And I said, look, I just don't feel that I can make a decision here because you actually haven't shown me any evidence of anything. You've just made things up, put them on a whiteboard and then said, make a decision. And I need some more. And another senior leader was in the room listening and said to me, Juliet, can't you make a decision? Because he was very outcomes oriented. They were used to that pace. I had, prior to this, been a tribunal member. So as a lawyer previously, I had sat on tribunals and I had made decisions day in, day out. I knew I could make decisions. So I knew that his framing was wrong. It wasn't about me not being able to make a decision, but it was the first time that I sort of came up against this, leaders being valued and endorsed and not questioned if they made decisions in the same way as everyone else. And I was rubbing up against that. So it was a very formative experience for me. And I was like, what's going on here? I hadn't had that before, but it showed me selection bias, because if I'd been junior in that situation, I would have adapted to that leader, or I would have been selected out of the opportunity for promotion.
100%. You learn what you need to do, what kind of decision making you need to be.
Yeah.